Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Garden Guru program. We're forcing bulbs so you have beautiful bulbs this winter. I would like to thank the Master Gardeners volunteers for presenting this program to us. If you have any problems or questions with technical difficulties, put your questions in the chat. Otherwise, if you have questions for our Master Gardener, you can put those in the Q&A part, and I will let her know that you have a question. We'll answer it live. Thanks a lot.
How many visitors do we have?
You could say your
Okay, hello.
Hello.
My name is Carlene Remington. I'm with the Wood County Master Gardener Volunteers, and I'd like to share with you some of my experiences and a little bit of accumulated knowledge concerning forcing bulbs. Think spring now. Before I start, I'd like to ask anybody who's watching via Zoom or here, if you ordered this weather, please rescind the order. We may be thinking spring for winter time, but this is a little bit too early as far as I'm concerned. Okay, enough about that. We're talking about taking your spring bulbs that you normally see coming up in March, and probably this part of the world more like April. The tulips, hyacinths, and other such spring bulbs, and looking at how we can get those to perform for us a little bit earlier. Part one, or step one, is to select the bulbs that are probably going to work the best for you to force. Those include single tulips. I have good luck with hyacinths. My favorite are daffodils and narcissus. Those are the ones that are all good choices. It's important to buy high quality bulbs when you're going to do something like this. And a general description about that is nice, big, fat ones. However, there are some other things you should watch for. I bought earlier this fall, because I was doing this presentation once before, I had to buy bulbs from a local big box store because that was the only thing that was available to me. Now, bulbs that size, I'll try and remember to get here in front of the camera. A bulb this size is a nice size for forcing. However, this bulb and any others that you're going to find at your big box store in the fall are going to probably be a year old. So I bought a bunch of them, a collection of those bulbs, and I already have thrown away a half a dozen because they are soft and mushy. They've been stored. So I would strongly suggest you not go to the big box stores and buy bulbs that you want to force. You'll just lose, you'll have lost some of the strength in that. Also, one problem with buying them at the big box store is you get labels such as this. This says daffodils, yellow trumpet. Well, there's lots of daffodils with yellow trumpets. And some bulbs force better than others. Which brings me to the next thing. The bulbs you choose, if you can find out, should be identified as good for forcing. And that brings me to catalogs such as this. This is from John Sheepers. That's one of my favorites. Another one is Brent and Becky's Bulbs. That's also a good company to order from. And one of the things you will find out in good catalogs like this is when you go to the descriptions of the bulbs, they will usually say in the description, good for forcing. So that's what you want to look for. That'll be true for your tulip bulbs. That'll be true for hyacinths. That'll be true for daffodils. All of those bulbs that you might want to force. So watch for those kinds of things. Here, I'll let you look at the catalogs. So probably you can still order if you go online to companies like Sheepers or Brent and Becky's. Probably you still can order bulbs that they'd have available yet. Those bulbs will be this year's bulbs from Holland.
Good to know.
And so you start out fresh with fresher bulbs and more likely to have good forcing when you do that. Once you've gotten your bulbs, then you want to make your decisions about how you're going to plant them. You can use pots that are clay pots, just plain brown clay pots. You can use plastic. I like the shape of this pot. I was poking around, so I happened to buy it. But if you don't have pretty plastic pots, you can use the regular plastic pots that you're used to finding. Just make sure they're big enough to hold the bulbs that you want to pot up.
About clay pots.
Mhm.
How about the clay pots?
The clay pots are just fine, just fine. This one has a little fancy design around, but just your regular clay pots will do too. And we'll get to that. There's a situation where you really do want to favor the clay pots for holding your bulbs. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So this kind of pot, when it comes time for your daffodils to be blossoming or your tulips to be blossoming, you stick it in a basket or a pretty pot that you have in your house, and you're all set to go. Last year, I didn't have enough pots for all the bulbs that I bought. So I used my plastic coffee. Yeah. And I just went around and dug holes or poked holes in the bottom.
I do that with a nail and hammer.
There you go. There you go. My holes don't even look as nice. I don't think they were done with a nail. But this size container will work just fine. You don't have to have a huge container for a small number of bulbs because it's not the same as when you're planting them in your garden. So make a decision about what kind of pots you want to use. And then make sure you use a good quality of bagged potting soil. I'm not advertising for this company. Happened to be a convenient one for me to pick up. But you don't want to use soil from your garden. Your forcing is not going to be as successful that way. So use a good quality potting soil. It does come with a little bit of its own fertilizer in. You don't have to add any fertilizer to the soil that you're using, but make sure it's a good quality. You want to, I should have mentioned this when I was talking about the pots. One of the things you want to do is to pick a pot that will hold at least 5 bulbs. Things look pretty skimpy and not as full and lush when the bulbs send up their growth and there's only 2 or 3 in because your pot wasn't big enough. So go for one that will hold at least 5 bulbs. Okay, I'm going to use this clay pot just because the big green one, what I really like, is so big I'll have to scoop a lot more soil.
You don't put any gravel or anything. in the-
No, you don't need to put anything for drainage. Just make sure there's holes in the bottom. That's the only thing. Smells good. Smells like we skipped winter and went directly to spring here. Okay, now depending on some of the pot construction and so forth, you'll be filling it about half to 2/3 full of soil. So it looks something like that. All right, these are some of the bulbs now that I have ordered for myself to force. And you'll notice that they are nice and big, hefty bulbs. And that's what you want. And you put them in the pot.
Those are some chubby bulbs.
Hmm?
Those are some chubby bulbs.
Yes. And sometimes people ask, can I replant these bulbs in the spring or the next year for in the fall to blossom in the next year? You can. Chubby bulbs will probably, I like your word, chubby. Chubby bulbs will probably be better for that than not so chubby bulbs. But you usually are not, see, this one is a triplet.
Boy, you got some big bulbs.
Yes, that's why I order 1 year for whatever reason. I don't remember why. And I'm not putting Fleet Farm down when I say that, but I bought bulbs at Fleet Farm. Maybe my catalog was out. I don't know. I don't remember. And all I got was green. I didn't get any blossoms. Now, that wouldn't have been true if I'd planted them in my garden in the fall, but it just was not successful. So I want you, if you're going to try this, to get really hefty bulbs. Here's another example of a hefty.
Big.
Yeah. Nice and big.
They're twins.
1, 2. Now,
Very nice.
those bulbs are so big, I can only get 4 in. I never know for sure on a double bulb like this. Oftentimes with this brand that I order from, this second one will send up a flower.
You shouldn't break a double bulb apart, should you?
No, you don't want to break them apart.
Okay, thank you.
Just go with
Okay.
so you've got, I can't get any more in there. It's full.
Oh, that is.
Yeah. It's full. So now the rest of it is to cover the bulbs. The tops of the bulbs can poke out a bit. There's no problem with that. This is not like when you put bulbs in your garden and it says cover with 6 inches of soil
Okay,
or something like this.
it's gonna be a pretty in there. Like, ooh,
Settle the soil around the bulbs. I can't add a lot more soil from this and still to this and still have room to water. But you see the points of the bulbs are poking out.
it's a very size pot for that.
So then stick a label in. You'll never remember what's in the pot when you go down in the basement or wherever you have them stored, and there's green coming up, but you wonder what kind of bulbs you've got in there. So label them and then water them well. Next step is to water them well. Now, after that, it's kind of resting time. Let's see, can I do this now? Just. Oh, okay, there we go. All right. Now comes the part that you need to plan for. Your bulbs are going to need a cold treatment for 10 weeks. Remember, normally you are putting these bulbs in the ground in the fall, and I have even planted them when the ground has started to freeze. And then they're getting a cold treatment through the winter, because that's going to kickstart the bulb. It's going to allow the roots to form, and it's going to kickstart the bulb into sending up growth in the spring. So you want roots to form in this pot, which will support the green growth and eventually the blossoms. So that's why you need to do a cold treatment. So you can't really plan to do this sort of thing unless you know where you're going to do or how you're going to do the cold treatment. I started doing these because I happen to have an old refrigerator in the basement. In some homes, that may be what houses the beer. And I don't know if you can always get the person who wants the beer in there to share with you. It would just depend on your situation, your communication, and so forth. But that's what I did. I had an old refrigerator. I set the thermostat at around 48 degrees, give or take a little bit. And that's one way to provide that 10-week chilling situation. You could put them in your regular refrigerator too, but you don't want some of the contents of your refrigerator. First of all, you got Thanksgiving and Christmas in there, and I don't think there's room for the turkey and the bulbs and all the rest that goes along with that. Also, sometimes the contents of your refrigerator will interfere with the bulbs growing the way they should. Another thing, and this is what I do, is a cold basement room or a chili fruit cellar I don't think too many people have, what do I want to say? The cave dug in the ground,
Systems.
a cold space like they used to have years and years ago, where they stored the carrots and the onions and all the rest of the stuff that they might be preserving through the winter. So a cold basement or a fruit cellar that's chilly. Or you can do some treatments that require you to be outside. One of them would be a cardboard box with 8 or so inches of dry leaves on the top and the bottom and the sides in an unheated garage. I've often wondered if garages in this part of the world get too cold. I've never tried this method, but it is one method that is recommended. And the emphasis on dry leaves, because as soon as the leaves are wet, or if the leaves are wet when you put them in, you're going to lose your insulating capacity. The dry leaves will trap the air and help to insulate your bulbs so they don't get too cold and they don't freeze to death, because you can get them too cold. If you have a cold frame, refresher course is, okay, the cold frame I used to have was made with an old storm window on top of a wooden box that can be lots of different sizes. The box fit the storm window, and the sides of the box were sloped so that the storm window would pick up the sun depending on what direction you put it. So you can use a cold frame instead of a box in the garage, and you'd have the same cold environment that you want. You can also use a cold frame in the garden. If you put enough dry leaves or hay or straw, that again would insulate. My problem with anything that requires you to put these outside is about the time that you want them, you're going to have to dig through the snow. I did not enjoy doing that in February when I tried using a cold frame one time. It did work. The cold frame did work. In fact, I did the last suggestion that's on the handout here, a 15 to 18 inch deep hole in the garden. And then you set the pots right down into the soil, the same as you would for planting your bulbs.
I mean, a pot like that.
A pot like this.
Okay. With the bulbs in it.
With the bulbs in, with the potting soil, watered before you put them in. And the suggestion is that if you use that method of cold treatment, that you use clay pots only, because the freezing and thawing that goes on in the ground would more than likely break up the plastic pots. The same as they would do if you left them out with damp soil and they froze in the wintertime. Again, you need lots of leaf mulch or something like that to cover the soil. And I would think you'd want mulch on top of the cold frame too, because that's the only way you're going to really get at it through the snow. But you get the idea. You're looking for something that will insulate the bulbs so that they don't completely freeze into mush. But you need to have it cold enough that it gives you that 10-week period of chill to get the roots formed and to kickstart the green growth. When you have the bulbs in storage like this, in the cold setting, you may have to water them 2 or 3 times. I do in the basement when I have these in the cold basement, because there's still air circulating around and it's evaporating the moisture in the pots.
But you maybe don't water them as much, maybe.
No,
once or
you
twice a
don't
week.
water them as much. You let, they can get dry, and then you water them, and then they go on again, and we'll continue to grow roots. But the whole thing is, if you're doing any of the storage outside and you have hay or straw or leaf mulch or anything like that that you're using as insulation, that needs to stay dry. Otherwise, the whole works is going to freeze into a big ice cube, and that's the end of your bulbs. Eventually, you'll start to see green growth coming out. Depends on the variety and what kind of bulbs you are potting up, as to which ones go faster and which ones are more delayed. I find one of my favorites is at least 1 pot of hyacinths, because hyacinths get going early. And so they don't even necessarily need all 10 weeks. So I like the hyacinths that kind of really herald that spring is going to get here. And different varieties of daffodils, different varieties of tulips are going to give you slightly different results in terms of timing. Just like that I've noticed that some of your daffodils bloom earlier and some of your daffodils bloom later, or your tulips bloom earlier or later. That can impact them. You bring them in, and if you're lucky, you can bring them in a pot or 2 at a time. Put them in a sunny window, water them, and watch them grow. And hopefully you've made a good choice of bulbs, and they've stayed nice and chilled, so they're happy and have good roots, a good root system going. When you eventually they're not blooming anymore, and you take them out of the pot, you're going to be surprised at just what a mass of roots you're going to have in that pot. That's what you want to have happen during the wintertime. If you want to try and reuse your bulbs, you need to keep watering them just a little bit, enough to keep them alive. They don't need to be watered the same as when they are blossoming. And let the foliage die back.
Not cut it off?
No, because what happens when the foliage dies is it sends some of that energy back into the bulbs. Now, you have really stressed those bulbs anyway by forcing them, because this is not really natural for them. So you've really stressed them, and you let the foliage die back. As much energy as possible goes back into the bulbs, and then you can unpot them and kind of clean them off and brush the soil off. And then in the fall, you can plant them just like you would normally, a bunch of tulips or daffodils or whatever. Then give them a good dose of bulb fertilizer. They're going to want it. They're going to need it.
I didn't know there was a.
And don't necessarily, pardon?
I didn't know there was a fertilizer for just bulbs.
Oh, yes. Yes, there is bulb fertilizer. But don't expect them to blossom the next year. So put them someplace where they can grow, a good environment that they can grow and build more strength in the bulbs as they grow through the summer. Probably some bulb fertilizer in the fall again, but for sure next spring, more bulb fertilizer. And that should help them eventually come back. I've had, I used to have a home in the Michigan UP. And that was where I used to put a lot of my used bulbs. But I never remembered where I planted them up there. So after a year or two or so, I'd always be pleasantly surprised by, oh, I don't remember putting tulips there, or I don't remember putting hyacinths there. And that's what you can do if you want to try and carry them over. But if you want to do forcing next year, you'll need to buy new bulbs and start over. Good hefty bulbs.
What causes bulbs to rot? You don't dry, not from not drying them out completely or something, or?
You mean bulbs that you have already planted in the garden?
Yes, and also in a pot. I mean, maybe I watered them too much.
I would say that's probably the likely. Yeah. I have had failed bulbs occasionally that I've forced, which I didn't realize were not good quality bulbs for whatever reason. Maybe it was starting to get soft or something like that. But I would say probably too much moisture.
Mhm. And
So
I have a question here. It says may not blossom again for a couple of years. Does that mean that they would blossom?
they'll send up green,
Okay, new shoots.
new shoots. Yeah,
Okay.
they'll send up green. The next spring after you first put them in, but they may not blossom. You really stress the bulbs out when you force them. And you kind of go into it knowing that that's what's going to happen. When it's February and it doesn't seem like spring is ever going to get here, you don't worry about the bulbs that may not grow the next year. Because you're enjoying what you have. And this is, to me, this is a lot more fun to plant them myself and have the satisfaction of a pot of daffodils or tulips in February or March, rather than going down to the florist
And buying a
buying a pot of bulbs. And it's a little cheaper. It's a little cheaper. So, any questions? Any more questions?
Well, I think my problem is that I maybe watered mine too much because some of my bulbs do
Hey, have you tried this?
not. No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't tried this, but you're talking about that you've planted outdoors
Yes,
in the ground.
like watering them every day and.
No. Bulbs, the original tulip bulbs, and you still can find them in the catalogs in something called species tulips. They're small. They grew in mountainous areas. Yeah, a lot of them came from that kind of climate or environment.
We're in the United States. I mean, isn't there someplace in Michigan or someplace where it seems I was there where they had a tulip farm or something?
Oh, you're talking about
Michigan.
yes, I know Michigan. I've been there.
Holland has lots of.
Holland, Michigan. Yeah,
Yes,
Holland,
that
Michigan.
sounds-
Yes. Mhm. But you know, any place that puts out displays of tulips like that are often replanting. In fact, a lot of people consider tulips as an annual. The bulbs don't do as well year after year after year as daffodils and narcissus and some of those.
Really?
Yeah, so a lot of people consider them to be annuals. So they dig them up and replant them the next year. Okay, good luck.
And thank you for joining us today.